In early April of 2020, I decided to read 4 years worth of Garfield comics and analyze them. Now, those 4 years consisted of reading 2 years worth of comic strips from 1978 to 1980 when Garfield was first published, and another 2 years from 2018 to current day 2020. The reason for this was because I wanted to analyze Garfield's history and determine if the comic series is still funny today. And the answer to that? No, it's not funny. At all. But it wasn't just the newer comics that weren't comedic, it was some of the old ones too. So, like any normal person this day and age, I started thinking more about Garfield. I thought, how could something so unfunny become so popularized despite it lacking what it was made to do, which was to make people laugh? And then I remembered shows like The Office exist, where the joke is there, you see it, you get it, but it doesn't really get a laugh out of you. So I suppose it wasn't too far-fetched of an idea. Nonetheless, I pondered this thought. If it's not through his comedy, then in what ways has Garfield withstood the test of time? And to that I say, Garfield has remained relevant these past 40 years solely through his relatability and quotability. In other words, his marketability as a commercial mascot. Ever since his debut in 1978, Garfield has had a major presence in pop culture, specifically during the 80s and 90s. From t-shirts to plushes and anime show, he even had his own telephone. Garfield was truly everywhere during this time, but like all good things, it must come to an end. In 2004, Garfield the movie was released, and despite the movie doing well, earning $200 million worldwide, it was met with negative reviews from critics with 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. The sequel, Garfield A Tale of Two Kitties, performed even worse. With that being said, Garfield hasn't had a major presence in pop culture for the past 14 years, his last big appearance being these movies, which I took upon myself to revisit after 10 years, and I must say, they're not great. But it's not like he just disappeared altogether. He's made some appearances over the past few years, he's been in some anime shows, a trilogy of direct-to-video films, and even some video/mobile games like Garfield, Garfield 2, Garfield Saving Arlene, Garfield's Nightmare, Garfield Labyrinth, Garfield Lasagna World Tour, Garfield's Diner, Garfield Zombie Defense, Talking Garfield, Garfield's Defense, Professor Garfield, Garfield's Wild Ride, Garfield Coins, Garfield's Mental Math Games, Garfield Kart, Garfield Survival of the Fattest, Garfield Go, Garfield Walk, Garfield Rush, Garfield Smogbuster, Garfield My Big Fat Diet, and who could forget Garfield Math Run? And although that's just to name a few, the reason I mention this is because that's a lot of what is primarily mobile app games for a character that hasn't really been relevant since 2006. When you actually take a look at these apps, a decent amount of these barely get played, barely work, or can barely be considered a game. And the other half of apps that actually do good only do well because they're clear ripoffs of already popular games like Subway Surfers, Pokemon Go, and Candy Crush. But the only difference is that this one has Garfield. Hey, you know Garfield? Yeah, I know Garfield. Yeah, we should check out this game. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it actually looks like really fun. Yeah, I could see myself playing it. Looks, it looks an awful lot like Subway Surfers. Is it, is this game any different from that? Yeah. This one has Garfield. I mean, you're not wrong. I, I have to download it. With the saturation of games in the App Store, not to mention their awful take on the popular strategy that's been prevalent on social media with corporate accounts such as Wendy's on Twitter and Chex Mix on Instagram being satirical social media pages, this is a clear example of a company grasping at straws at an attempt to stay relevant in today's culture. And it's sad to say that Garfield doesn't achieve this, because that's not Garfield's strongest suit. Garfield's relatability will always be what has put him over the edge and made him as popular as he is in comparison to other comic strips. Take a look at Heathcliff, for example, another orange cat of a fairly popular comic strip with the same name. When comparing the two side by side, some may look at Heathcliff and think that he was created to piggyback off the success of Garfield, but the thing is that Heathcliff was created and published 5 years before Garfield was even created. So the confusion here stems from the fact that Garfield's so popular and well known that to see another character who's the same as Garfield but who's lesser known, people jump to conclusions. But why is Garfield more popular than Heathcliff? Well, it's like I said, Garfield's more relatable. You look at the comic material seen in Garfield and compare it to that of Heathcliff, and the difference is apparent. Garfield's creator Jim Davis has made it clear his intentions with the comic series is to make it more accessible to every audience. A simple background, nothing too flashy, no mention of politics, holidays, or current events. That's why a lot of the comics, new and old, aren't funny, because they're not meant to be. In my analysis of the Garfield comic series, I may notice something I called the Garfield effect, although, as I know, it's less of an effect and more of just a pattern I noticed within the modern Garfield era. Regardless, comic strips I noticed that featured this Garfield effect were very bland comics where nothing interesting happened, and it was just Garfield saying saying something basic yet relatable. I thought this was just a lazy writing as a result of the series having gone on for 40 years now, but no, it's all intentional. As said by Davis in this interview from 1982 when Garfield was most popular, these short 3-panel strips are designed to be unfunny. They're meant to be little one-liners that you can see on the mug or a card and think, huh, that's pretty cute and relatable, I should buy it. And boom, marketing. Garfield was written to appeal to the audience, hence the existence of tropes such as I hate Mondays and his obsession with lasagna. Heathcliff, on the other hand, is written for comedy and is trying to further grow/expand on this character/universe. That's how most comic strips nowadays are written. Examples such as Foxtrot, a comic series I really enjoy because it's genuinely funny, it's clever, and the art style is pleasing. Garfield doesn't really do this, however, and that's why Garfield's so popular. More often than not, casual readers don't want a comic strip that's supposed to make them think. They want something simple that they can relate to, such as saying a funny cat who, despite never working, hates Mondays, because even in this world of many differences, one thing that can bring us together is our hatred of Mondays. Garfield appeals to this audience, but what kind of audience is this exactly? After discovering that the comics were never meant to be funny in the first place, it's hard to imagine that the series has any concurrent readers to this day. I should know, as someone who back in 2018 started to read the entire Garfield series from the very beginning, as much as I liked the character, his charm wasn't enough to keep me interested once I made it to around 1985, and that was largely in part due to the lower quality of the comic and the change in art style as the years progressed. This change in quality was caused by Davis's increased focus on his company Paws Incorporated, the company he founded to take care of the licensing for Garfield. So by doing so, to quote the Huffington Post in their article from 2015, a weekday strip, Davis said, would take him a little over an hour to produce, amounting to 13 or 14 hours of work per week. That freed up around 60 hours per week to spend on licensing and other Garfield-related projects. This lack in quality is what caused a turn away in readers in Garfield's main audience, which mainly was children of Gen X and early millennials who grew up reading the comics, and a newer shift onto the younger Gen Z, as well as the later millennials who surprisingly like Garfield, but for different reasons as the previous generation. As the world gets older and society continues to grow and develop, each generation of kids are becoming smarter than the last. With technology continuing to advance, children are exposed to more things at an earlier age than their predecessors before them. Shockingly enough, and as weird as it sounds, this includes Garfield. And I say this includes Garfield because, to restate, he hasn't made a major presence in pop culture in 14 years. Yet people of my generation know him and find him funny. But the reason they do is because they see through Jim Davis's intentions to sell products using the lovable feline. They see through that and think, this is a character that's purely used to sell products and has no real comedic value to him other than the fact that he hates Mondays and loves lasagna. You know what? That's actually kind of funny. Like ironically. Why else has Garfield had such a shockingly high number of cameos in shows and movies where they specifically make fun of him? Take Parks and Recreation, for example, the I Hate Mondays shirt, Rick and Morty, the Gazorpazorb field, Shrek 2, they mention I Hate Mondays, Zombieland, Bill Murray himself states, oh, what was your biggest regret? And he says, probably Garfield. Millennials and Gen Z think alike in terms of liking Garfield purely to make fun of him for being a bland mascot with such quirky and iconic tropes. It's that same reason why weird amounts of Garfield accounts exist on Instagram, or the reason why I bought an official Garfield hoodie that features a comic of him smoking a pipe, or why I bought a canvas painting of him to hang in my room. Because it's funny. The mass marketing that took place during his prime has caused a distaste to the feline, and in turn has people making fun of him for it. But in the end, it doesn't matter in what context he's being shown off. What matters to Jim Davis is that his creation is still being promoted almost 42 years later. There is no such thing as bad press in his eyes. As long as people continue to talk about Garfield and reference him in other forms of media, his name and legacy will continue to live on. He's been so heavily marketed that even when Garfield dies, he won't really. The passing of time is a constant and inevitable, which only means that we as a human race will continue to experience more and more Mondays as long as we live, and will only continue to hate Mondays as long as we live. And every time we sigh and mutter, I hate Mondays, we'll continue to think of that fat orange cat. There are many, many things in life that are inevitable. Death, change, mistakes. Never once did I think one would be Garfield.
Pardon the technical difficulty.
Big drummer, stone cold stunner, flat runner, hot like summer. My lover ain't no sucker. She'll break your windows, that's no funner.